Okay, so it's recording right now, and let me bring up the study guide right here. And if you already have like a DevNet reserve, feel free to go through these labs as quick as you'd like. And if you run into any issues on the Discord, you can always ask us questions. But I'm just going to do some stuff on the screen, and feel free to turn off the audio if you don't want to hear me or whatever. But I'm just doing this mainly for the recording to help others that were unable to attend. They'll be able to follow it and kind of keep up with what we're doing. So I need a new terminal here, or I'll change directories. I've already reserved the DevNet Sandbox. And if you're just joining for the first time, go back to some of our original sessions and look further up in this study guide. And this is the actual link to the study guide. Put that in the chat in case anyone doesn't have it. Chat. So here's the link to the study guide. Most of what I mentioned is, if you scroll up, it has step-by-step instructions on how to reserve DevNet, how to use CML, the Cisco Modeling Labs, and so on and so forth. So I've already grabbed one, and my CML is already set up, and my routers are running. So if you follow those steps that were mentioned, you'll be able to go in here and turn off the default topology and then turn on our topology. So here we have like a 3-layer topology, and in this architecture, it's CSR 1000V routers for the core and distribution, and then it's Nexus OS for the switching down here. So it does give us some different devices to create different groups and things like that. But it's not a huge topology because we don't have really enough RAM to run too many things in the sandbox. So this works out pretty well. And it's similar to what you would see in the lab environment as well. Not exactly the same thing, but close enough. So from that, what we did last time is we made it to the inventory, and then we ran out of time. So what I want to do is I need to set up my environment, which is something I have to do every time. And it's referring to this here to scroll up. If you haven't done this before, you might have to make some of these files because they'll be net new. But if you worked with us the last time, you'll have an inventory file. So that's in your repo. But one thing I do recommend doing is I'm adding files periodically. So it's a good idea to pull that down as well. So one of the repos is this one, this Ansible4Networking. In the study guide, I'll show you how to access this. But I'm already here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the URL from here, and I'm going to clone that down. So it's tick clone. It pulls it down. But I just made a mistake. I just cloned that down to my laptop. The first step that you have to do is you have to access your jump box in DevNet. So that requires you to SSH into developer as a username at 10.10.20.50. It's always that same IP address every time. And the password's always capital C1SCO12345. And now I'm in the DevNet sandbox environment, the jump box. So if you look in the existing files, this is what you'll expect to see here. And then I want to clone down those files in case there's anything that I need from them. So this would be files that I'm providing for you guys to use. So you have to say git clone first. That'll pull them down, and now I have the folder that says that. And then I also have my own repository, right? So I want to pull that one down, but I don't have to do that one manually. So there's a step further up here that will help us out a bit. All right, so we already pulled down this repo, but inside that repo, which requires me to change directories, there's some files. There's this make file. So I want to use that file, but before I do that, and I think I forgot to do this last time, is I want to create an environment variable with my user. And by user, I mean GitLab user. So that's where the repo is. And this would require you, if you haven't done this already, is you need to create a free user account in GitLab so that you can create a My Project folder. And that's where you'll save all your files. Right, so that's my username. So that goes in there. And then now that I have that in there, I can go ahead and type make. And it's going to configure on this dev box multiple things. And the reason why we have to do some of this is because the environment that we're working in is fairly old. And it's got like old versions of Python and tons of things that we need to change. So this is kind of the first step towards changing things that we need so that way it works properly for us. So depending on like DevNet, sometimes it's a little slow downloading stuff. So you may run into that. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. So while that's doing that, it should create my project folder. And it should use, the correct username. So let me scroll back down to where we were. So what we want to do is we want to make some modifications and some additions from what we did last time. But I can't really do that until this is done. So what's it doing now? Installing Ansible. Is anybody going to Cisco Live? I'm going to Cisco Live, and I'm going to ask some of the folks in DevNet to see if there's a way to get a better jump box in there, or one that's more updated, rather. But if any of you are going to Cisco Live, let me know, and we can actually meet up there. I'll be working, like Red Hat will have a booth in the World of Solutions, and we'll be providing demos and things like that. What I'll probably do from now on is I'll assume everyone will know how to do this, so I'm going to do mine ahead of time so we don't have to wait for it. The next, like, we're just doing like a quick modification of our Ansible config file, which if you've worked on these in the past, we did a couple other edits earlier. So we'll continue to add to that file. But the next thing is variables. So these are some links for your own reference to go and look and to understand how variables work in Ansible. And variable precedence and location are two things that are usually confusing for many in the beginning. And location is a challenge because there's so many locations where you can create your variables and store them. So one place is the inventory. So you can create all, like at the scope of all, like all of your groups, you can create variables at that level. You can create group variables in your inventory or host variables in your inventory. You can also create a folder called group variables, and Ansible will look for that folder. If it doesn't find like the order of operations. It'll look in the inventory, then it'll look in like group variables in a folder. It'll look in host variables in a folder. If it doesn't find them there, it will look to see in the playbook if you've pointed to a variable file. It'll look to see if you have variables actually in the playbook. So it'll look, you know, in all these different locations. But sometimes the variable could be defined in more than one location. So then that's where the order of precedence is important, because if I define a variable, let's say in the inventory, but then I create an extra variable, which is like an ad hoc variable that we define either in the command line or in the GUI in the controller. We can create like surveys, and then those are turned into extra variables. Extra variables actually override other variables. So it depends on like where the variables are located, which one Ansible will actually use. So it's a good idea of going through precedents, because that could become a problem, you know, as you're building these. If you have different variables that you may create, you know, at one location that sort of be like the default, but then they're overridden, you know, somewhere else. You just want to make sure you understand that so it works as intended. And then also it's a good idea to understand like all the different locations where you can, you know, set these variables. So what's going on here? Man, this is really taking a long time. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do this ahead of time. So now that's done. What's left? Okay. I think there's not much left. We're almost there. It's like slow just looking, like trying to locate the mirrors to download the file. It's like everything's kind of slow. The good news is you can preserve these things for like 4 hours, so it'll eat up, you know, time in the beginning, but just make sure that you kind of, like if you're going to study, I would just do it a little bit ahead of time. Now it's installing the collections. So it's doing Nexus right now. In iOS. Hey, it's done. So the change directories back to there, to the home directory. All right, so this is the one where the initial one is the one where I give you files. This is yours, the My Project. So this is one that you would have in earlier lab created. And this should have all your stuff, your specific labs that you've already completed. And you have to remember to save them each time as well. So CD My Project. All right, so in here, I have an inventory file that we worked on before. I also have the Ansible config. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy to save some time and modify that one. So to modify it, here I'll use the Vim editor just because that's available on this jump box. And I didn't mean to. If you hit Escape Control Z, it'll take you out. Yeah, there we go. All right, so here's what's already in there. If you do double D's, it'll delete lines. I will insert lines. Insert. Right, so to save it, it's escape, colon, WQ. If you have an existing file like I did, it'll want you to put the exclamation point, the bang. That saves it. And then the next thing that we're doing here is we're going to make some variables. But in order to do that, I have to create these folders because we're going to use the group variables. So we're going to create these groups. All right, so that created A for N network, router, and switch. So those are 3 different folders that we'll use. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create some variables in each one of them. So the network, if you look at the inventory, so this is what we created before. You can see that network is a parent for router and switch. So any variables that we want to establish that apply to both routers and switches, we would do here. But variables that are only relevant to like switches would go in this group, and the ones for routers would go in this group. And if they're only, mapped to a particular host, then we would do host vars. So we're doing group vars right now. So we'll go ahead and do these real quick. I probably should type it a bit quicker. All right, so now I'm in another editor. And then here's what we need to create for the actual variable. Let's scroll over here. All right, so this is for the connection type. We're using network _ CLI. What are some of the other connection types that we might use on these types of devices? So if we're working with REST APIs, right, like with Nexus, it doesn't have to be network CLI. It could be the HTTPS API for Nexus. We use netconf with Juniper. So it just depends on what we're working with, what type of connection type. So these routers and switches are all Cisco devices that can use network CLI. So that's what we're using. So let me escape Q. All right, and then we're going to do some at these other levels. So here's for the router, or what's unique from the router. Always remember to do I if you're going to paste, because it'll miss like the first couple characters. All right, so from this one here, this is the router group. And what I want to do is the network OS for the router is ILS, which is also means ILS XE. Escape. And then we want to do the same thing for Nexus, but not in this file. So I would want to go over to here. We'll get rid of that. That's not the cool thing is, once you do this and save it, you'll have this for all your later labs. You'll never have to do this part again, unless you want to go through it, multiple times just for familiarity. All right, so now we know like how to connect, but we don't know how to authenticate to our devices. So we can do that in clear text and just create Ansible user and Ansible password. But we're going to learn how to use Ansible Vault. So Ansible Vault allows us to encrypt our credentials. So we'll go through that and try to save some of this stuff I know this session will have to be a little bit shorter from a time perspective, so we'll try to wrap it up here and maybe go over just a little bit. So, and also feel free to drop off and you can watch the recording afterwards as well. So what I want to do is create a file, and that file will include just our username and password. So the way that it works is I use the Ansible-Vault command. Get this stupid screen to work, right? And I need to create the Vault file also in the group as well. So because we're using the same username and password for both the routers and switches, then the network group will work for us. So it'll be fine to do it there. So it's Ansible Vault create, and there's some documentation too up here that goes in details of very low level details in using Vault. We're just doing some basic stuff, but the main things that normally we need to know. So I'm going to go into group bars and A for N network. And it's going to be vault.yaml. So also Vault, when you use Ansible Vault, it knows to look for a vault.yaml file. So it'll look into your group bars for that specific one. Don't worry about like these deprecation errors. This is just because of that older version of Python 3 that they're running in this Cisco DevNet. So it wants you to provide a password. So make sure that when you first create these, you don't have to use the exact password that we use, but just make sure that you remember what you use. So if you don't, then you'll have to like delete it and start over. But we are going to point to a password file, and those will have to match. Get this cookies out of the way too, so we can see it. So what did I use? Let me make this bigger. Ansible4Networking is what I use for the password. So if you use something else, just remember that, because we'll use these in the future. All right, so now you're in what looks like the Vim editor again, right? But this is through Ansible Vault. So you still have to use Vim commands. So and then Ansible user. And Cisco for the user, and Ansible password. What some people do, and I've done this many times, is instead of Ansible user, I'll put Ansible user name, and that does not work. So escape, WQ bang. Right, so now that's there. Now, if you want to make sure that it's there, you can do an edit, Ansible Vault edit. It asks for that password again. So mine's Ansible for, is it capital? No, it's not. Networking. I might have screwed that up. Let's move on. Here, fat fingered it. Yeah, so when you use the edit command, you can actually see what's in the file. But what's interesting, I'll just do Control Z to pop out of there. If I do cat to it, you can't see it, it's encrypted. So just some basic Ansible Vault commands. Now the problem is it'll keep asking us for that password, that Ansible4Networking password. So what we want to do is create these directories, and I may have already done this in mine. Let me see. ls. Yeah, I already had mine created. I don't think it'll hurt if I do this part again, but you need to create these directories, and it's just a hidden directory, but it's there. But normally you wouldn't do this like this. You would put this directory somewhere outside the scope of your project that you're working in. But for these labs, it's not going to hurt anything. All right, and then you have to change mod or change mode, or however you say that, so that you can actually be able to access it later from Ansible. And then you'll create this Vault Pass text file. And then you got to change mod that because we have to access the pass file too. And then we have to create that password in the file. All right, so I already did this earlier. So if you're doing this now, you'll have to add this into this file, Ansible4Networking. But what this says is now Ansible can look into that directory for that password so that we do not have to provide it when we run a playbook. So it just happens behind the scenes. But no one can see our username and password. They would have to have access to this Vault password. So that's why normally this would not be somewhere like in a repository, right? So this is only because it's a lab. Normally this would be just some other folder, outside the scope of your working directory that you're, have all your playbooks and whatever else. All right, so we know where it is, but now we need Ansible to be aware of that. So if we go here, and by here I mean the Ansible config file. So go back into there. And so we have these entries. We just want to add a new entry. And we're just telling Ansible where that they can find that password. Right here. Right, so I think it's just one last thing here we can probably break. Yeah, we'll kind of break here and then we'll do the ad hoc stuff later. Yeah, so let me just finish this off. So with this inventory, it's a little bit different than the other one that we had. So we're going to modify the inventory, but to make it a little bit easier, quicker, I'm just going to take the whole thing and copy it. And inventory. All right, and I'm just going to remove this. So I just hit D's all the way through all this. Insert. Paste it in. And you can see, okay, yeah, it's all good. Make sure that the structure is okay. So what's different about this is I actually, in the earlier inventory, we had like a range in the host. So like I would have, like with the switches, we had 2 of them. So we had 0 and 1, it's just a range. And the reason why I did it this way is we can actually define the Ansible host variable, which is the IP address of those devices. And the reason I did that is because in this jump box, the etc host doesn't have entries for any of those devices. So this is a way around that. So instead of having to go in every time and modify that file when we have a new sandbox, we'll just do the same thing but from Ansible. So we're just explicitly adding those IPs in here. So those are just host variables that are in the inventory, and we should be able to connect to those devices. These are the devices that are running in your CML environment. All right, so we have that there. So one of the checks that we normally do is once we have an inventory and credentials and whatnot, is we can do a simple test to make sure that we can connect to the devices in the inventory. It doesn't do anything fancy. This is not like a ping, like an ICMP ping. This is just go out to those devices and make sure that they're actually there. right? So it's the Ansible-M Ping module, right? So the -M is for modules. And then you have to give it a group. So A4Net includes the routers and the switches. So it's able to connect to all of them. Now these, what are these warnings? The pylib SSH is not installed. So in older Ansible, it uses Paramico. And in newer Ansible, the default is the pylib SSH. This is like a FIPS 140-2 approved way of using your SSH. Paramico's older. This lab's older, and it's older Python, so I'm not going to worry about this because it's probably more trouble than it's worth to upgrade, try to get the Python, because it'll take even more time to load everything. So that's what this warning is. It's just we're connecting using Paramico. It's falling back to Paramico. But we do have a working inventory, right? And we're able to touch these devices. So that's a good start. Now, from a time perspective, this is probably going to be a good breaking point today. So I'm sorry we didn't get further along. So I'll put a placeholder here, and we'll pick this up the next time from here. But I'll have all my stuff actually pre-loaded, and for folks that are newer can go back and look how to do it themselves, you know, to be able to work with the lab environment and to bring up their My Project and all that kind of stuff. So we'll start directly from these command lines, and we'll go through these. And if we should have time to at least start the next topic, which will be the Ansible Navigator. So here we're still working with Ansible Playbook, and we'll go through those. And the way this is, I never really kind of know exactly where we're going to stop. So I'll put a new placeholder with the date, you know, from where we left off. So if you're following this later, you'll always see like dates of where we started and where we stopped. So like, for example, this one had the March 31st. So I'll move the April 14th back a bit, and then we'll start from that. But feel free to use Discord. If you go ahead, you can go ahead and do as many of these labs as you like. If you see something that doesn't work, let us know on Discord. So this is the Discord, and there's a link to join this that's on the meetup group. And I could also add it into the PowerPoint as well. So having said that, thanks for staying on a little bit longer. But before I drop off, let me pause to see if there's any questions on any of this stuff.
Yeah, Tony, I have an announcement.
Okay.
Yeah, guys on the Discord, feel free, like Tony says, if you have any questions, and also we could meet one-on-one. You know, we just have to schedule it. I try to keep my office hours for this stuff like from 7 to 9 p.m. unless I'm busy with work or other stuff. But and if because I've done a lot of these labs myself already, and so if you're a beginner, you know, you have another beginner like myself, so there's that for you guys.
And another like disclaimer too, and John's like run into this before, where sometimes something will change. Like there was this one repo that they modified to private and it didn't work anymore. So sometimes like it'll work, and then we'll try to use something, or the Sandbox, they'll change something. So we'll continuously go back and like edit whatever we need to if we have to do something differently over time too. So that lab guide's kind of like a work in progress, and it may have like changes, you know, here and there as we go through, and then it'll have new labs. You'll notice new labs added. My goal is to try to like every week try to get some new labs that are like ahead of us, and then that way, if you guys want to, you can look at them ahead of time too. You don't have to wait for the actual session. Cool. So thanks for staying on a little bit later, and I hope everybody has a great weekend, and hopefully you have good weather for your weekend. So yeah, so with that, let me go ahead and cut off the recording, and I look forward to talking to you guys next time, which the next one will be access list. So we'll spend like the whole time drilling down into access list, which is something that that I'm always finding interesting scenarios in that regard. So hopefully some of you have run into some challenges trying to work with this.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, John. Take care, everybody.